think that looks pretty well settled. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Sue Allchurch and I work at the UN Global Compact, obviously with Paul. I previously worked at Unilever with Paul, so I'm working in this space of sustainability and how business can really make progress. We are here now. We've been on this 15-year journey to deliver the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which, if you like, are the world's KPIs. We should all be focusing on delivering a world that we all want to live in. We're 7 years in, so this is stock take year. We're really having a look at how we're doing. Suffice it to say, we're not on track. The pandemic and the current war in Ukraine has set us back. I can give you a couple of KPIs, obviously. Poverty, for the first time in the last couple of years, we've seen extreme poverty, the number of people in extreme poverty go up for the first time in decades, reversing lots of really strong progress that's been made in the past. So we really have, and poverty is going to affect a lot of other of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we need to get back on track. We'll be looking at that this year and today. And also, you know, you've seen the latest IPCC climate report that's come out, making it clear that it is absolutely human activity that's driving warming. We need, and Secretary General has been very clear, we need to cut emissions, we need to get back to the 1.5, we need to make sure that we're bringing technology and finance to emerging economies so that they're on board and able to engage in what will be a new growing economy. We need to look at the high emitters, transport, etc., cement, make sure that we're working there. So we're going to talk today with a couple of people who are really working hard alongside us to do this. So first of all, this is my colleague Gwenaëlle Avishwet, I'm getting that right, who is the Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at Schneider Electric, a company that's very actively involved with the Global Compact in many ways, and very particularly in living wage globally and in climate. And I'm also joined here by Dave Barber-Woodward, who is the UK government's representative to the United Nations. So welcome to you two, and look forward to a good conversation. Obviously, we have questions as well, so welcome any of your questions going forward. I'm going to kick off with looking back. So we've been doing this for 7 years. There's been a lot of progress, and I know that the Science Based Targets Initiative has 4,700 companies who have committed targets. But I'd like to talk really practically about what you've been doing in the last 7 years to try and deliver against the goals. So I'll start off with you, Gwenaëlle.
Yes, thank you very much. So first, we are fully embarked into the SDGs goal. We have been deploying a strategy in order to not only commit but deliver concrete results for each of the SDGs over the past 15 years in reality. So we are contributing to all those SDGs. And for us, it's not just a matter of deciding right now to commit. It's just a long run over time. And I have to say that we used to say internally that it's like a marathon without a finish line. We are always trying to reinvent ourselves in order to deliver those goals. And just maybe to give you a sense of examples. Yeah. So one example, everybody think about decarbonization goals. And of course, we are very committed to that. So working on our decarbonization. But that's not enough, because when we look at emissions, in reality, we have to embark the whole supply chain, suppliers, customers, and that's what we are doing, embarking much more along the value chain. One example. The second example, in the SDGs, there is a lot about resources, water, protecting biodiversity. This is also one commitment. As a company, we have a role on that front. So we have taken biodiversity commitment, and we report on a quarterly basis where we stand. For example, green plastic, green material, how to commit and to make sure that our own products by 2025 will use green material by 50%. So just one example on how we commit. So it is on resources, but it's also on trust. You were talking about living wages, but in reality, it's also decent work. This is a way to engage into our suppliers, not only on decarbonization, but on decent work too. So this is the third pillar. But also it's embarking all generation in this journey. All generation, and in particular the youth, and in particular making sure that we train people in electrification, in all those new areas, so that at the end of the day, where we stand, We provide projects, but we provide also a way to train the youth in these new technologies, in this electrification. So we have a target of 1 million people that will be trained by 2025 on everything related to energy management. And at the end of the day, it's to provide a just transition when it comes to investing in all those concrete targets, decarbonization, biodiversity, etc. It should be a just transition. And therefore, we have been committed to deliver access to energy, as an example, of 50 million people by 2025. Again, our goal is short-term goal, 2025, and we want to communicate on a quarterly basis so that it's very transparent and it's short-term so that people can realize that even we have long-term commitment, it has to be realized step by step, every quarter, on a number of, numbers of targets across environment, but also social.
Gwenelle, I would also just like to build on that question while you're talking about it. We have a really interesting question here, which relates very much. I was going to ask you what are the challenges, but I think this question's pertinent at the moment, which is how do you make stakeholders, board members, organizations like yourself consider all of the SDGs, the social goals, as well as the climate and emission goals, because there's so much about climate. It's not to say we're on track and we're not doing great, but you're a great organization working with us on that whole social area. How do you make that important?
Well, we want people to realize that's the only way a company can do well financially. In 2009, we were a company worth 9 billion. Okay, 9 billion revenues, and today it's like 40 billion of revenues. And the share price has gone the same way. And, our commitment was sustainability, not now, but like 15 years ago. So in 2009, when we decided to invest in our research and development, in our business models, it was all about sustainability. At this time, we had plenty of questions because it was not top of the radar as it was today. And since the beginning, we were saying that sustainability, it's not only decarbonization, it's environment as a whole, carbon, and also resources, biodiversity, water, etc. And we're saying that it goes hand in hand with social pillar since the beginning. And that's why it pays off. And that's why we have created confidence and trust with our investors, because they recognize that over time, it's not just one commitment, it's delivering with numbers of KPI that we track, for which the methodology is well approved and well recognized by investors. Yeah. It's over time.
Definitely. I'll just a little point from how the Global Compact answers that question. The Compact is really just an agreement of a set of moral principles that you would all run your business, that you would run your families by. They cover environment, anti-corruption, human rights, and labor. It's principles, and it's really moral leadership. So that's the way that it works at our end. It's a moral code. So why wouldn't you run your business that way? Of course. Anyway, let's go back. Looking back in the last 7 years, I'd love to hear from you, Barbara, about what the British government's been doing to help deliver these goals, and what have been the challenges in the last 7 years.
Well, thanks very much, Sue. And as you say, this is a midway point. And of course, in September, the UN will do what the UN does so often, which is convene summits to review this. And at the midway point of the SDGs, we have 9 summits this year, at least 6 of which will fall in September. So it's going to be a bit of a summit fest, but a really good opportunity to focus on where we get to. And I think the challenge will be, as you set out, to stop this becoming a sort of hand-wringing festival of we're not on track for any of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we're way off track, what we need is more money, and then we get into a standoff situation. So I think the work that you're doing here, the work that you're doing with the Global Compact, the work that Gwenelle is outlining is really important, so we look for ways forward. But in terms of the UK government over the last 7 years, let me pick out, I think, 3 things. The first is we have mainstreamed the Sustainable Development Goals into our foreign policy development and strategic thinking. So most recently, we've just published the Integrated Review Refresh, our relook at foreign policy in a world that is dominated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and a more complex strategic threat from China. Again, Sustainable Development Goals integrated there, integrated too into our international development strategy. So mainstream them into our strategic foreign policy commitments. The second thing we've done, I think, is done quite a lot of work in the UK to mainstream them through the UK. Obviously, companies here will know what they are doing and how they've interacted.
Yeah.
But I've been very inspired when I've been round to look at various cities. Manchester, Bristol are obvious examples, at the way in which cities have integrated sustainable development goals into their policy development and delivery. And there are far more: Sheffield, Liverpool, London, and so on. But Manchester and Bristol are the two that I've worked with most closely. And the third thing I think the UK government has done over the last 7 years is to try and use our convening power. We are, of course, permanent members of the UN Security Council. We are on the G7. We're in the G20. We chair the Commonwealth. We are now out of the EU, but we still have a lot of convening power when we think about convening the Global Education Summit last year, chairing COP27 in Glasgow just a couple of years ago to focus attention on the climate side, and then the work that we did as chair of the G7 in particular to set a target of 700 billion for infrastructure investment development. So I think those three things are probably the things we've focused on in the last 7 years.
And what's been the challenges? Do you track and find out where I'm on track, when I'm off track?
I would say constantly, but perhaps without quite enough data, which is why this year is going to be very important with the data that will come out on progress. But we are, like everybody, I think, blown off course. We were blown off course by the COVID pandemic. On the other hand, that gave us one of the best examples of public partnership with the private sector. When you think about Oxford AstraZeneca working with Gavi and COVAX, we've been blown off course by the rapid acceleration of climate change. You referenced the IPCC report. And we have utterly been blown off course by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. The most recent example, we've put just over £150 million into East Africa as humanitarian aid. Without the war, that could have gone in as development and SDG assistance, looking towards building infrastructure, schools, hospitals, creating jobs, and so on. But we've been really set back by Russia's war.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a question here about looking at the goals on a quarterly basis or looking longer term. Maybe you can comment on why was that? Why if quarterly tracking on the goals can be criticised in the long-term sustainability? I mean, for me, you need to look at your journey on the way to get to these long goals, but I'd love to hear about how you and UK government handle that.
So I think we perhaps at the UN take more of a thematic approach to the goals. So we have, for example, just come out of the Commission on the Status of Women, the annual event that looks at gender equality. So we've had a big focus on gender equality in the last month. And we have also just actually were co-chairing part of the Water Conference, which also took place this month. So I think rather than looking across all 17 and the 169 indicators every quarter, we've perhaps taken a more thematic approach. The positive might be that we do make progress. We made real progress, for example, on women's access to digital technology at the Commission on the Status of Women. We perhaps lose some of the drumbeat focus. But I think picking up what Gwenelle was saying, it seems to me about setting milestones that are time-bound, but not expecting everything to move forward at the same pace and knowing what you're going to achieve by when.
Yeah, indeed. I think the short term is needed in order to keep your eyes on the prize, because the world is changing, it does change. This is a place that's moving, this ecosystem's changing all the time. So it is really worthwhile looking regularly at milestones in order to keep us on that long-term goal. So let's shift to the next 7 years, and what are we doing next? And I'd love to ask you both again, and starting with you, Gwenelle. We're looking forward. What opportunities do you see to speed up, to maybe set higher goals, and from yourself, but also the business world as a whole? How can what opportunities are there for us to step up and move forward so that we do get back on track?
Well, very good question. So first, if we look at the numbers, among the Fortune 500, you have only 16% that are committed to SBTI-approved methodology. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it shows that there is room for improvement. Yeah. And how to do that? Basically, it's not just having pledges over pledges. It's just showing concretely how to move the needle. And I will maybe give you one example. You know, we wanted to decarbonize, and I would just give you this example about decarbonization, but I could elaborate on social and other aspects. On decarbonization, when it comes to our own footprint, we can do stuff on scope 1 and 2, so our own emission. In reality, the bulk of the emission is always on the scope 3, downstream and upstream. So when we engaged with our suppliers, to decarbonize, these are small companies, SMEs. So they want to do something on decarbonization, but when it comes to have access to carbon offset or PPAs, power purchase agreement for renewables, they do not have access to those markets. It's too complex, it's too well organized, it's for big companies. Therefore, if we want to be optimistic, we want to embark all those companies, not only the big ones, but also the smaller ones that do not have the right access to all those markets. So that's what we decided as a company, to embark the whole ecosystem from suppliers to customers, and therefore you have meaningful impact. That's how we position the company. So it sounds simple. In reality, it's very complex. When we engage with our top 1,000 suppliers, representing more than 70% of our upstream emission, it took 2 years. 2 years to do capacity building, training, making them aware about decarbonization, what it means, and having a way to measure the carbon footprint. After 2 years, we started to have discussion around how to achieve decarbonization. So we launched this program in 2021. In 2022, end of 2022, we just reduced their emission by 10%. It's not enough. Our commitment is to decarbonize our suppliers by 50% by 2025. So we need to accelerate. But I would say the first 2 years around capacity building was so important. And it's just to showcase that at the end of the day, what makes us optimistic is that if every company is not only looking at their own perimeter, but embarking the whole ecosystem, working with governments, working with suppliers, working with customers, that's the only way we can achieve a meaningful impact and much broader impact.
Yeah, thank you, Gwenaëlle. It's interesting because we do a CEO survey and a survey amongst practitioners every year, and what you say is exactly the same. The number one barrier, the number one challenges that CEOs are finding is extending across my supply chain. So we're running more supply chain capacity building for suppliers. And then secondly, the number one way that businesses are delivering against their goals is capacity building inside the supply chain and inside the business. It's also important because it's a really great way of engaging the employees who are increasingly voting to join companies who are actually really delivering on these commitments. So yeah, it's the suppliers and the supply chain that we really need to help and enable, and also find ways that they can access capital at a decent price for small businesses to thrive and grow. We're doing some work in India, in Kenya, in Nigeria to make sure those organizations and those countries can thrive. But again, Barbara, same question to you. What do you see as opportunities going forward to help us speed up our trajectory towards these goals?
Well, I should say that, first of all, we are doing a piece of work now looking at cross-cutting enablers. When we look across the 17 goals, the 169 targets, to try and work out where there are cross-cutting interventions, whether it is digital or energy or so on, and try and pick some of those out. But without wanting to prejudge that, let me pick out sort of 3 things. The first is money. Yeah. It's always about money, and as I said earlier, we do need to avoid the SDG summit in September turning into we need more money, there isn't any more money. And the first and most important thing we're doing now is trying to look at reform of the international financial institutions so that we can get money out of the door more quickly. We can address some of the challenges around illicit finance, tax flows, and we can ensure that this reform is green. And I think the spring meetings coming up, the appointment of Ajay Banga to the World Bank will be very important. And there's a delicate relationship here between, I think colleagues will know, the UN, where of course all 193 countries are represented, and the World Bank and the international financial institutions, the IMF, that sit in Washington, which do not have all of these Global South countries on their board, and trying to use the UK in particular to support things like the Bridgetown Agenda to make sure that we can amplify the voices of the Global South into that equation. So finance would be my first thing. Secondly, I think, building on that, we have got to make progress on climate change. We've heard it out of the IPCC report. I think we made quite good progress in Glasgow, but you've already highlighted where we need to do more in terms of big carbon-emitting industries, seaborne transit, air transit, and so on. And I think we need to accelerate progress on that. We didn't make as much progress in Sharm as we might have done. Moving through to the UAE, we need to, again, move that agenda forward in all of its complexity. And then third, I think we need to make progress on gender equality.
Yep.
When you look at the basic facts, two-thirds of illiterate people in the world are women, and you are effectively excluding them from the workforce, from productivity, from making a contribution. And if ever you doubt that, you just look at what's happened in Afghanistan since the Taliban took over, excluding women from education and from the workforce, and the economy is just faltering now towards famine, starvation, and depredation. So we do need to, I think, have gender equality as one of those enablers.
Yeah, we do indeed. And what we see at our end is there is sort of growing representation at leadership levels, and there are more Fortune 500 CEOs, but still it's only 7%, so there's a long way to go. But the real issue, again, is the supply chains.
Yeah.
So we know in our organizations that are making goals and targets for female representation in management right through the organization, we know how to do it, it's proven it can be easily done, but only 8% of them have a requirement for a certain number of female leading suppliers. And that could be a significant change if we could make that work. Anyway, one thing it's great to have both of you here is I'm a very firm believer, I would be because I'm at the UN Global Compact, that we're going to do this together.
Yeah.
In collaboration. I believe that the more humility and humanity in the world coming together with genuine moral leadership is the only way that we'll cross the divide and we'll make this progress. And we have big barriers to overcome, so we have to do it together. So first of all, I would like to ask Gwenaëlle, what would you like governments to be able to do for you to be able to really thrive and drive your goals in your context?
Well, for us, governments should not only take pledges, but also put emphasis on solutions. And I think the more the COP are turning around solutions rather than just only focusing on the wordings, because wordings can be tricky at some point, it's for the best. Yeah. And for example, when it comes to, again, back to decarbonization, we are thinking about renewables. Okay, that's a great solution, but in reality, there are plenty of other solutions. So we need to advocate and to communicate more and more that there is a bunch of different solutions, and new technologies are emerging so fast. When it comes to decarbonization, we don't have to wait because everything is already available. Everything is already available, and even more, everything is already affordable. Yeah. And I think this is something that we need to communicate more and more. And the question is that today there are so many priorities. Look at Europe, for example. With the war, there were so many discussions around security of supply, but we should never forget the goal. Sustainability is still there. And if we want to solve security of supply for energy, we have to solve sustainability. It goes hand in hand. Because at the end of the day, we need to develop more distributed generation, for example, for renewables, on-site renewables. We need to develop more energy efficiency measures, etc. So, we have many priorities, COVID, and then the war, and then many geopolitical, let's say, tensions that are arising. But at the end of the day, sustainability, women's core, whatever happens, it's always the solution. So I would say, we should always stick to the goal. We should always try to cooperate and turn wording into actions and leverage on, the technologies that are relied or developed by some companies. And maybe to bridge the gap on that front, I would say, when it comes to those companies investing in new technologies, it takes a long time. But companies that are really committed on sustainability will make a huge difference. Just to give you one example, we have been investing into research and development for a long time, but everything that we were doing was focused on sustainability. One question is, how do you bridge the gap between financial goals and sustainability? Well, 15 years ago, when we were investing in R&D, we wanted an R&D that is focused on sustainability. One example, we have, breakers across the world are using SF6. It's a huge gas emitter. 10 years ago, our CEO was saying, we want to invest in new technology by replacing this gas by pure air. Can you do it? It took 10 years to develop the products. We didn't know if it would work. 10 years of investment. And finally, we released a product without any SF6. It's a huge enabler in the market. And just to tell you that, yes, it takes a long time, it takes investments, but at the end of the day, this is the only way we can differentiate over the long term. And that's how we reconcile financial goals and sustainability goals, because at the end of the day, this kind of product is so amazing for the market that you will attract lots of customers.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, the influence on businesses now is broader. There is investors, and they're looking for progress against sustainability because it de-risks a company as well. But consumers, employees are also influencing companies, so that is going to affect the financial results as well. But Barbara, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what are you doing in the UK and what could governments do to create an enabling environment for organisations who really do want to lead in this agenda, because they don't want to be the only ones, and we don't want the really progressive companies that want to make change to be penalised. So an enabling agenda from the governments would be great to hear about.
So I think it's probably worth starting back in the preamble of the SDGs, where it says very clearly, there is no peace without sustainable development, and there is no sustainable development without peace. And that is something that the UK is deeply committed to, and it takes up a huge proportion of my time at the UN. And we had, for example, about 47 Security Council meetings last year on the Ukraine war alone, and that is without talking about North Korean nuclear missile launches or conflict across Africa, Sudan, Yemen, Libya, and so on. So I think that's got to be the fundamental thing that the government is doing to create a wider enabling environment. But coming more to the local picture, it is, I think, about regulation, but it needs to be developed in conjunction with business.
Exactly.
And it's regulating existing areas, as Gwenella's been saying, but also thinking forward into regulations in the cyber and digital space where we haven't really gone yet, but also making sure that when we use economic levers in foreign policy, like sanctions, we work through the economic impacts and consequences of that, not just the direct ones, but the indirect ones on supply chains as well. So it is, I think, a complex balance to get that right for government, and then making sure that we create an enabling environment, not a disabling one.
Yeah, and then working with businesses clearly going to help. And we have a question here about delivering the goals locally for you. Where did it go? It was a question about what can the UK do locally in specific areas about an enabling environment here?
So I have to say that's probably not really my greatest area of expertise, sitting in the UN, but I have spent time, particularly in my previous job, when I was the British ambassador to China, talking to British cities where they were really embedding the SDGs, which gives them a point of reference to talk to other cities doing the same things, gives them a point where they're talking very directly to local business, often smaller businesses, as well as some of the big multinationals, to embed those goals. And as I said earlier, then the British government can provide a context-setting umbrella by integrating the SDGs into our international strategy and into our international development work as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, we can see that as well in other countries where cities can drive a lot of change. a lot of change by themselves and generating a lot of activity. Well, we're finishing up, but I do have one more question I'm looking at here, which said, the world is evolving, and will the SDGs be revised and evolve as well? So that's like, oh, let's shift our targets because I don't like them. No, we've got to keep our eyes on the prize. Why would we say, oh, let's not do no poverty? I'm okay with a bit of poverty. Like, no, we have to eliminate. I'm okay with a little bit less worse equality. No, we have to keep our eyes on the goals. What we do need to do is keep looking at where we are today and how to deliver better, how to make sure we do deliver decarbonisation, how to make sure we are eradicating poverty. It's not acceptable. The world's got enough money to be able to look after everybody. Health for everyone, education for girls. We're not going to change the targets. We've just got to change our behaviour and deliver on them. So help us all, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well said.
Great.